Pam Gregory, please tell us a little bit about yourself and why we're talking about your new book. You don't really believe in astrology, do you?
Well, thank you, Sean. I've been an astrologer for about 40 years now. I've studied thousands of charts, and yes, I've just released what I hope will be my first book. Hopefully there'll be more to come, called You Don't Really Believe in Astrology, Do You? And in one of the chapters of that book, I've actually looked at the history of astrology too, which is absolutely fascinating.
Could you tell us a bit more about the history of astrology and who the individuals have been who have used, worked with and benefited from astrology over the period of human history that we know about?
Yeah, I mean, as far as we understand it, astrology began about 6,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia, which is now modern-day Iraq. But that was the beginning of civilization, of writing and arithmetic, and people were living very open to the heavens, so they became very interested in the movements of the planets, and they believed that deities actually lived in the planets. And they developed myths around each of the planets, and that's really how astrology began at a very early point in history. But strangely, the myths that they attributed to those planets then, Mars, god of war, Venus, goddess of love, are still consistent with those that we use today, which is really quite remarkable. And to answer the other part of your question, who are the important people in history that we may recognise that were part of the astrological framework as well? Some of the greatest thinkers in human history have been astrologers. Plato, Pythagoras, Copernicus, Galileo, Goethe, St. Thomas Aquinas, Hipparchus, Hippocrates, Ptolemy, those great minds. Carl Gustav Jung, much more recently, they were all astrologers. And they were very good astrologers, and astrology and astronomy were intertwined at that time. It was the science of its day.
Well, that's interesting. You mentioned Carl Jung.
Yes.
And we were talking earlier about him, how his influence is still felt by everyone today, not only in the world of modern psychology, but also in film.
Yes, absolutely. It's very much part of our psychological understanding now, but not many people realise he was an astrologer, and he would use astrology to draw up the charts of his patients because it would give them such a shorthand to understand their psyche, to understand their issues, because it's a very quick way in understanding. Some people say it's your soul as well as your psyche. So he used astrology very, very widely in his patient practice, but his whole theory of archetypes, of psychological archetypes, are astrological archetypes. That's what he was drawing on. So his entire psychological thesis is actually astrologically based, and not many people realise that.
So what is an archetype for those who don't fully understand?
Okay, an archetype is, it's been called one of the deepest parts of our psychic functioning, and essentially they are a cluster of symbolic associations. So in its very simplest form, Mars is god of war, so it represents energy and assertiveness, and I want to be the winner. If you look at something like Uranus, it's to do with breaking up old patterns, bringing in the new, being very original. If you look at something like Saturn, it's burdens, it's old age, it's connected with time, it's connected with playing by the rules, working hard and playing by the rules. So each archetype has a different set of symbolic associations which are quite rich, and each of us has our own particular patterning of those archetypes in different weights, in different combinations to make us who we are.
So archetypes, as we were discussing earlier, are aspects, ways of being that people understand instantly.
Yes, that's right.
And
that's right.
You were telling me how Carl Jung's basic archetypes like the hero are now used in modern day movies as a standard.
Yes, that's right.
So and people are able to understand the movie more quickly.
Yes, and he was really inspired by the use of archetypes in astrology. Absolutely.
That's absolutely
amazing. And they came from myth originally. They were based on the myths that the people from way back in ancient Mesopotamia started to create when they told each other stories on those long dark nights with no cinema and no television about the gods that resided on each planet. And that's how the whole thing began. And myth and astrology were originally very intertwined as well.
So what happened historically to astrology? Because in our time, it's been marginalised.
Yes, very, very good question. Very good question, because really for About 6,000 years, up to recently, and I'll talk about recently in a moment, it was just a natural part of society. It was part of religious education, it was taught at ecclesiastical colleges, it was taught at universities all across Europe, it was part of medicine. You couldn't be a doctor in the Middle Ages if you didn't understand astrology. It was part of science. Astronomers were astrologers, it was absolutely part of science. So it was part of day-to-day life, and it was only really in the Age of Enlightenment when Newton came along, and Newton was a very clever chap, and because of his thinking we can send a rocket to the moon, but because he developed laws of motion and things were very much based on a clockwork universe, a mechanical universe in which things operated by gravity, for instance, he said that the planets couldn't possibly influence the Earth by gravity. They were too far away. And apart from the moon, he's absolutely right. That's not how it works at all. But he, at that point, said astrology was therefore poor thinking. It was superstition. It couldn't work on gravity. It couldn't work on the laws of motion. The laws of motion defined the universe. They were everything. So astrology was dismissed to the periphery of society. And the Newtonian paradigm is still the prevailing one in the mainstream today. But I think the time is ripe for astrology to be seen in a very different context, because it doesn't operate to mechanical laws. It operates very differently. So and that's what the book's about.
Sorry, yeah. What makes astrology relevant now to people?
Oh,
more so than before.
I think it is. I think it is relevant in just so many ways, and perhaps more relevant because astrology has become more sophisticated with computerization. We can become very specific in how it works in people's lives, and you know, really, you could say everything is in your birth chart. Archetypally, everything is there. Your development, the person you are in terms of your personality, your skills, your talents, the challenges that come to you, the events and experiences that unfold in your life. It's remarkable. Everything is there from that seed moment. And so it acts for you like a roadmap, because it's specific to you, it's individual to you, and you can see how your life is unfolding developmentally. And that is massively helpful. I mean, for me, it's my higher self on paper. You know, I'm guided by that. I'm not dictated to, but I know if I follow that guidance, life will run more smoothly because I'm cooperating with what naturally is. And it's when people resist what is trying to unfold that problems occur. So I think it is completely relevant to wherever you're at in your life. It gives great insight, and I think it also helps you live with much greater meaning and purpose, because even if you're going through tough times, it can show you why you're going through that process, what the deeper meaning is of you having to go through that process, what you are calling into your development at that time.
So Pam, the title of the book gives a little bit away of your view on astrology. You don't really believe in astrology, do you? What do you say to somebody who says that to you?
Well, I've been asked that question so often, but to me it's a nonsensical question. It's like saying to me, you don't really believe in French, do you? It's the same kind of question, because astrology is a language. It's not a belief system, it's a language. And I can feel that same kind of clunking in my brain if I'm translating French or astrology. It's a language, and it's a mathematical language. It's very precise, it's very deep. I think it's quite a sacred language, but it is a language. And that's how I use it.
Pam, it's been fascinating again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure, Sean.